Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second digital event. This is our Female Founders event. We're going to give everyone another minute or so to dial in, and then we'll get started. And we're very excited to have with us Renee Hartmann from China Luxury Advisors. Renee, while we're waiting, and since everyone's listening anyways, maybe you can talk a little bit about, kind of some of the, inbounds you've been seeing and where we are with regards to, kind of the U.S. learning from China. Kind of what are clients calling you about right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like you mentioned, we've been dealing with this, I think, for a couple of months now based on China. So our company is focused really a lot on the Chinese consumer. So I think what's been interesting is seeing some of our clients here in the US. They're asking us a lot of questions about what to do during this time. So one of the things that comes up a lot is content, for instance. What should we be posting during this time? Should we not be posting during this time? Are we being insensitive to be, promoting products during this time to people? Is this just not the time to be being commercial? So we're hearing a lot of those questions from clients. Should I pause paid media campaigns? Is e-commerce a viable alternative during this time? We've seen also a lot of people looking at cross-border e-commerce from China too. So that's something that the sort of the quote unquote Daigou customer, which is sort of this a little bit of a gray market, but it's people purchasing products in the US or Europe or Japan outside of China and shipping them into China. That's an area that I think retailers have tried to stay away from in the past, but I think people are going to start to be a little bit more open to some of those practices now. So we're getting a lot of questions around that and how to redirect the sales force during this time too when you have the retail closed down. So we're getting a lot of questions about, how can we market during this time? How do we connect with consumers? And then practically, how do we continue making sales during these periods of time?
Great, that's helpful. So everyone, thanks for joining us. For those of you who've just joined, we're very honored to have Renee Hartmann, co-founder of China Luxury Advisors, on the call with us. Renee and I think originally met back in Hong Kong, and we've worked together on a few projects, and I've always been incredibly impressed with her deep understanding and insights around the Chinese consumer. In terms of China Luxury Advisors, for those of you who don't know the boutique consultancy, they really help focus around China strategies for, Western brands. And some of the companies, she's got an impressive list of clients, but just some of those include L'Oreal, Fendi, Away, Bergdorf Goodman, Taubman, and Hudson Yards. So Renee's firm really understands both the retail and the real estate aspect, and with a significant focus on marketing. So Renee, let me kick it off. We talked a little bit about this Daigou customer. Can you elaborate for those on the phone who might not know what that is, in terms of how that kind of works and what we're seeing now? And, there's been a lot of changes there. So how would you compare kind of 2019 to 2020 as it relates to the Daigou?
Yeah, so for those of you guys who don't know Daigou, it's a Chinese term that means to buy on behalf of somebody else. And so how that works practically is that, Chinese consumers will like to purchase products overseas, and they will basically go through a network of sellers to get these products. So it could be anything from, beauty products that are already available in China, could be vitamins, health products, sneakers sneakers and streetwear are a really hot sector right now with Daigou. So we're seeing basically what ends up happening is there are a lot of individuals who live in the US and Canada and, Europe. Italy is a big hotspot for it actually, Japan, Australia. And they will purchase products and then they will sell them to Chinese consumers and they'll ship them over to China. So it makes up, I think, close to almost a third of the luxury market globally. It's a huge, huge market, but it's very, by nature, because it's so fragmented, it's really difficult to get straight numbers on it. But practically, it makes a large impact in a lot of the luxury brands, as well as food, hygiene, safety, all those types of products as well. So what we're seeing now is there's continues to be a lot of individuals who go out and purchase things. And then we also have seen businesses that are actually doing it, legally. So there's some people who will purchase the products and then sell them without declaring them to customs in China. And other people will go through the process, declare the customs, do it legally, and still send it over. So we're seeing both types continue to expand. And what we saw is even during the coronavirus, even in February, which was kind of the peak of the coronavirus in China, nobody left their house in China for almost a month. I mean, China's been on been in their house since Chinese New Year, which would be probably, end of January until about at least the end of February. They're starting to kind of come out now and things are starting to get back to normal. But even during the worst time of the coronavirus, the Daigou providers here in the US, they saw their revenue double during February.
Wow.
So people were purchasing products still. Of course, it's going to be a lot of like hand sanitizer, face mask, all that kind of stuff. So that I think started the early wave of all the supplies kind of going. So, but then it's everything from vitamins to food products. Ironically, the number one category during that time was streetwear. So sneakers, everything from, sneakers, mostly sneakers, I would say, but in general streetwear. And then beauty is also another huge category where people are purchasing. So we are seeing people continue to purchase even during this time. And I think one of the other things that we saw that was really interesting, I think a lot of the beauty brands actually saw on Women's Day, just at the beginning of March 8th, they saw some of their best performance ever in China in terms of e-commerce. So what a lot of people did is they were doing a lot of WeChat sales, a lot of social selling. They redirected their sales staff to focus on WeChat and starting groups, giving special offers out to people, arranging delivery. So people are getting pretty creative in terms of how do you adapt. And that being said, retail in China has been pretty much non-existent for the last 2 months. But the e-commerce and the social selling, we've really seen increases from that. And Daigou was one of those areas that really saw an increase too.
That's interesting. And maybe we can also talk a little bit here in terms of strategies that you're, kind of approaching for your own business and other, advice you have for other small businesses. I think we have a poll that I'm going to launch right now in terms of, how are you adapting your business to the coronavirus? Because I think all of us are, kind of working together to best understand, the challenges and, kind of what's happening and when and whatnot. And so I'll leave the poll open as we talk. But Renee, as you've seen some of the, kind of changes in China, how have you utilized those insights to adapt your own business, and what's some of the advice that you've been giving to others on both sides of the, if you will, on both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, because we're dealing with clients, we've had to continuously adapt. I mean, I think what's been the most challenging probably is just the continuing changing. It's, day by day, we're getting different. I talked to a client yesterday who said, on Tuesday, all my budgets were intact. On Wednesday, all our budgets for the year were cut. So things are happening so fast. It's really difficult, I think, sometimes to keep a track on what's happening. The way we've been handling it during the China coronavirus is just trying to figure out, what sectors are going to, where do we have an opportunity? First of all, trying to secure our existing business, right? So clients that are being hit hard, how do we work with them to make sure that we're helping them during this time? We're adapting our strategy. We, in some areas, are starting to switch to more technology solutions. So for instance, we have tourism clients who usually do a lot of, we have destinations that usually do a lot of road shows. They're constantly traveling around the world doing road shows. So we're taking those all online, doing mini program development with WeChat. We're doing live streaming. We're doing, same thing, webinars, trying to keep that process going. So we've tried to pivot a little bit more to technology solutions that help people do that and help them through this time. I think on the strategy side, trying to make sure that we're being able to kind of adapt to what's needed. We're working with some clients now on how do you take some of the lessons learned from China in social selling. That's something that China has been extremely innovative in and is not so innovative in the US. So how do we take your workforce and then drive them to more of a social sales model? And it's really difficult here because, one of the things is the sales staff are not incentivized to do that. They're incentivized for retail sales, not e-commerce sales. So part of it is, how do you take your organization and switch things during this time to change incentives, right? So maybe you have a retail staff force. If you haven't laid them off, they're still there. How could they be helping your e-commerce sales? So I think taking these creative approaches, and this is a time when I think people are willing to try new things. We're seeing people do things they wouldn't normally consider, and looking for those pockets of growth. And I think that's different for every brand, every company, every organization has a different perspective. So I think there's no one size fits all. I mean, I wish there was, it would be a lot easier. But just trying to, figure out how do you take each of the clients, and then for us as a business, how do we pivot, right? How do we deal with, we do a lot of marketing, and marketing budgets are being cut right now a lot. So how do we, pivot to things more like, e-commerce driven technology solutions, research strategy, those types of things, although they're probably also going to get cut. How do we get more creative, and how do we try new things to continue to generate revenue and be able to support people as they're looking, globally where the pockets of opportunity are. And I think that's the other thing too, is it really for us individually, for us as a company, I think one of the key learnings we've had from this is we have to be really diversified, right? So we need to be geographically diversified. We need to have business units diversified, because if all we're doing is media buying and all of a sudden all the media dollars dry up, then, there's not much we can do about that. So really trying to be diversified, which can be challenging, especially as a smaller business. Like, how do you do all these different things? I think that's one area we've tried to really focus on, and that's been able to help us somewhat, shift and get used to trying new things.
What's interesting is we have been talking to a lot of the retailers and brands here domestically, right? Based on some of the things we've learned from China in terms of live streaming, digital marketing, right? There isn't a platform here like a WeChat in terms of how they can sell our mini programs. But, to me, what's been the most interesting is without like a real live streaming kind of platform here, there's some real challenges. So maybe you can talk, we really saw, at least at Coresight, a significant impact positively on business as it related to Double 11 last year, in 2019 around live streaming, and there was a big push by Alibaba. Can you maybe talk a little bit more, go a little bit deeper in terms of just what have you seen from a live streaming perspective, and how you think even, U.S. retailers could approach it? And also another question, what are U.S. retailers who are global, what are they learning from their China teams and bringing back here right now?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that I think did work in China from the overall live stream and kind of social selling is, there's a million different platforms even in China. So I think what ends up happening is the platform is less important. It's just more of the ability to do it. And I think you saw that with, Tencent did this with a number of the fashion brands for their fashion weeks. They were actually doing live streaming of the shows. So I think we're seeing more people kind of taking these innovative approaches to it. I know they had some, fashion shows with no spectators, just live streaming, right? So being able to do some of those things. I think on the more, we've seen a lot of influencers doing live streams, and they'll be pushing things out during the time. But I think one of the most interesting parts was really how the sales staff in China, innovative. We had, examples of people creating WeChat groups, and like every day, so WeChat groups are kind of like a WhatsApp group. So they would basically try to take and they will talk to all their clients that way. So they'll put them all in a group, and they were doing like fun events during the day. Like at 1:00, we're doing a special offer, and we're going to, put 100 of them up there until they sell. And so they started making it kind of like a game. So I think one thing that was interesting is they tried to take, everybody's home, they're bored, they're scared, what do you do to kind of lighten the mood a little bit? And that's one thing we saw actually, I just happened to notice, and I haven't been following it that much, but I noticed that Hartmann, one of the LA handbags, they put something out on their social media saying, hey, every day we're going to start surprising people, and we're going to try to lighten the mood a little bit and try to uplift things. So I think that was an area, especially in an area like luxury and beauty and fashion, that are kind of not such serious products. They're a little bit more lighthearted. So is there some ways you can kind of, obviously not, and this is where I think some brands are scared. They're scared to say, like, I don't want to seem like I'm profiting during this time. How do I do that? So how do you, build that balance? And I think what was great about the sales staff in China is they know their customers quite well. So they were able to kind of do things that were innovative for them and do what works for them, and not necessarily a company-wide perspective. So I think if there are ways to kind of take that social selling approach, and a lot of them did do live streaming. I think one of the challenges, obviously, if everybody's, not at work and not in certain places, you have to get a little bit more creative. So I think we saw people live streaming from home, talking about different products, doing live streaming, video, fitness, things like that. So they are getting a lot more creative. Even I noticed, like, Conan O'Brien today said, I'm gonna go back on the air in the end of March, and I'm gonna have all my staff stay at home, and I'm gonna do it by Skype at my home. But that's gonna go on TV now, right? So I think the rules are changing. And how do you adapt during this process? And maybe it's a time when, it's not glossy, it's not perfect, but that's what it is. And that's what people are doing right now. So how can brands and companies kind of take that approach in a way that's, something that's different than what their brand is like typically, but are they able to be a little bit flexible during this time and innovate?
So you said something really interesting around, if we look back at February and saw what was strong in China was streetwear. And I think that those companies innately have this idea of, right, limited time, limited quantity, limited offering. Yeah. And I think there's a lot here in the US that we can learn from that. And, there's some product that, I've seen sell out. On the other hand, and this is certainly, believe me, we're trying to be constructive and support all of retail, but I have seen some of the department stores which are like, okay, everything's 25% off. Well, that doesn't really kind of get me going, but hey, if at 1:00 for an hour, everything's 25% off. Right. That's exciting, right? And so I think that there's a lot that can be learned. And once again, a lot of these retailers are outside of luxury, tend to be very domestic, but there is so much that we're seeing that, that Renee, you and I have learned It is also interesting, I think, to think about, because we're being asked, right, a lot about this kind of post-corona world. So what have you seen? I mean, and we've seen a lot of stuff already, like some from malls who've done some very interesting kind of activities. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen so far, and what have you been surprised in terms of how, retailers and brands and kind of the REITs, malls have kind of persevered, and what are they doing that's, attracting people back quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think retail's probably been, physical offline retail, I think has probably been one of the one of the most hard hit parts in China, I would say. So, we're just now starting to kind of have people come back out from retail. So there, it's a little bit harder. I think most of what we've seen is more of this shift to the online sector and more of the shift to the e-commerce sector. I don't know, Deborah, if you've seen any interesting mall examples or retail examples in China. I can't think of one off the top of my head where I've seen them doing something at retail, but I know, I think more of this, like the AI and the smart retail and the technology enabled, where you can have, contactless abilities and the ability to do, quick pickup. So I think the integration of technology is one area where we can really see some advanced changes. And I don't know, Deborah, if there was any like interesting examples you saw from China on that.
What we've seen has been, something I never would have thought, but, once again, at least here in the US, we often have this, and China as well, right? There tends to be a bit of friction between the landlords and the tenants. Now, one of the reasons I think that that's less pronounced in China is because the lease terms are shorter, different, a little bit more flexible than they are here domestically. But what we have seen, and this is where I'm very hopeful for the future in terms of, right, I know a lot of people here are already asking for rent abatements, et cetera. We have seen some of the malls that have opened where they've worked with their tenants to have, right, like free product. And,
That's a great idea.
Puma was one of them that I know is offering free product. And I think it goes back to, right, I will forever remember Puma as being a company that's been supportive, in China of the current environment. And I think, right, customers' memory is quite long. And, if we want to attract people back, and it could be, hey, every hour we're giving away something, but
right.
I agree with a lot of what you're talking about in terms of some of the examples that we've seen. And once again, the technology here, right, we're all kind of adjusting in real time. It might be a little bit more rickety. But I do think that there's a lot, and right, retailers should focus on driving traffic, to their sites as well. I think you brought up a question that it's been a challenging one for us to deal with at Coresight, which is, if you still have marketing budget, what should you do with it? How should you be sensitive to the consumer during this time? And once again, what did you see were some of the learnings from your work in China that were successful, and how can we think about, kind of talking to companies here domestically about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw, if you look at social media as an example, I think what's been interesting is, we've talked to the brands, and I think, to continue posting as normal is probably not, without at least acknowledging what's happening. I think it's good if people can acknowledge, they can show empathy for what's going on. They can provide quick updates of closures and things like that. But then I think outside of that, that's just the basics. But outside of that, how do you adapt your content? Because, this is not the time to be, if you're a travel destination, it's not the time to say, like, go to Grand Canyon now and do all this kind of stuff. You have to kind of take a different approach. So what we've seen is people getting really more focused on educational content. So more deeper content, more insightful content, more of like a learning perspective than an action oriented. So I think that's something, video content, doing things like webinars and live streams, like adapting their content. I think there was a great example in the US already with the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, where they let their penguin out and went around to visit all the different exhibits. So I think the more people can be creative with content and try to distract people a little bit. People are home, they have a lot of time. I mean, that's one thing we saw, some of the areas that we saw in China that were up, obviously all the business conferencing was up quite a bit. Any kind of entertainment is something, that whether it's TikTok challenges or whether it's, people watching video, but social media is an area for that too. So brands have an opportunity during this time to connect with people and to really, give them an escape and give them something they can connect to that's interesting. I think the museums and the cultural institutions have done a great job of this with all the free tours and, just being able to kind of open up their libraries. So even, hey, here's all these films that we had that you usually had to pay for, but they're free now. So how do you can use this opportunity to connect with your consumers and to build that loyalty with them? That's, I think, an area that's really, really well spent is, trying to be creative and come up with new things. So I think that's one area that we saw a lot of changes. We saw a great example of empathy was during the China coronavirus, the LA Tourism Board, they actually had a symphony come and they created a song specifically for China that was meant to be kind of a, like, we're in it together, it's solidarity. So having these areas where you can kind of show support, I think is great. And obviously LVMH is doing this with the with the hand sanitizer that they're manufacturing now in their plants. So I think these are some opportunities for brands and to kind of connect with consumers. And, obviously it's not necessarily going to translate into sales right away, but that those ways to connect with them and to build that relationship is an opportunity. And if people can be smart and adapt and be creative, I think there are some ways they can really take advantage of it.
I think you bring up an incredibly important point, which is, an LV is a great example where you're continuing to drive business. It's a very positive message. And, it's like a win-win. It's a win for the consumer. It's a win for the brand. Right. We are getting a lot of inbounds in terms of, and I'd love to hear about how you think about it for your own team and just advice, right? As it relates to, right, there's empathy, but also kind of concern for the individual, concern for the employee. As a small business owner, how are you kind of, and maybe we should look at the poll results now. So we had, how are you adapting your business to the coronavirus, right? 14% are looking at cost reduction, 14% are looking at work sharing, and then 57% are looking at business pivots, and 14% at financial assistance or funding. And Renee, I appreciated very much last night. This is a great example in real time, right? You were sharing, ideas with me on like small business loan applications. I think all of us working together, we will kind of come out on the other side. What are some of the things that you've done to already kind of change your business, and what advice do you have for other female founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we've tried to kind of, make quick changes. We've actually, funny enough, have been working from home, I think, since the end of January, actually, because we had a number of Chinese employees and they were just kind of concerned about the coronavirus. So we've actually been working remotely for a while now, just to kind of alleviate the concern. So I think that's one thing, is just to take people's concerns into account, what is going to make them comfortable. I think obviously there's a lot of tension and anxiety among everybody right now. And so how do we kind of, make that change? We've done things like tell people like, do not work late, get sleep, prioritize everything. So if we see somebody working late, I'll tell them, go to bed and get off the line now. I don't want you working late. So I think that's part of it, is just trying to kind of emphasize the personal connections. And then for us, I think we're looking at probably all of the above in terms of, how do we adapt our business to the new environment? And I think it's changing day by day. And I think one of the things that's been, nice for us is we've seen, we have had clients who have started to put us on pause. They've been really nice about it. And, I think the more we can kind of work together, we've even seen a couple of clients kind of saying, trying to do us some favors, like, hey, we're going to have to put you on pause, but we're going to give you a couple more months, or we're going to slide this one through real quick. So I think even our clients actually have been really helpful in terms of trying to stay in it together. So I think, the best thing to do is to kind of band together and find solutions of, how can we help each other? It's going to be tough for everybody. And I think we just have to figure out, how do we work together to get to the other side of it and do those pivots and be quick and agile. And hopefully as a small business, I mean, that is one nice thing about it, is just being able to be a little quicker. So I think whether you're large or small, everything is speed right now.
No, you bring up a great point. It's interesting because some of these, certainly, and I've talked about pivots and how can we be here for, especially the retailers who needs, I think, a lot of help right now amidst, kind of some of the physical store closures. And this idea of work sharing, right? Where can, we all work together? And a lot of this could be, if some of your clients also, maybe they're not in a position to pay you, but can they pay you with services or something else that they're already doing?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
One other example, and it's more in the industrial space, but you talked about LV. I think it was interesting to see kind of, GM and Ford talking about making ventilators for coronavirus patients among shortage fears. So we're seeing, and I think in the next 7 days, right, we've already seen an announcement from Salesforce in terms of, products that they're going to offer for free. I think we're going to see announcements from some of the other major technology companies, hopefully some of the payment platforms as well. I think we're still very early here, but what I've been, and Renee, I'd love to hear your insights, where we're starting to see people step up and, offer to help, small businesses and large, and just try to all work on, getting through this together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think and hopefully that's a time, I know that it's been great kind of talking to other female founders and other partners that we do. I think it's a great time to kind of reach out to a partner network and see how we can all work together. I mean, this is the time to band together and kind of figure things out. So that's one of the things we're trying to do too, is just start to reach out to everybody and just find out what creative solutions we can have together. And so it is a time when I think people are open to things and they're willing to try things and, do things for free that we wouldn't do before.
So one thing I want to bring up is, right, and for people on the line who haven't done a lot of business in China, some of the things that I've personally found very interesting is where, you have competitors in another market who actually kind of work together to drive overall sales. Renee, did you see a step up in the China market during this, kind of challenging time where maybe you saw kind of unexpected affiliations or, kind of companies banding together, and what were some of those learnings, and, how can we think about it here once again in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the larger, the companies like the Alibabas and the Tencent, some of the larger companies, I think started to take more of a leadership position where they were doing, JD.com, some of these big ones, would be the equivalent of like the Amazons and the Facebook and these guys. I think they really, stepped up as leaders during this process. So I think you'd like look at somebody in the US, the equivalent would be Amazon. I mean, Amazon, it seems like it's going to be like the number one generator of, the economy right now. So how can big companies like that kind of work with other smaller companies to sort of create win-win solutions? Because I think those are somewhere that you're seeing kind of the opportunity for them to change. I know Tencent, one thing that was interesting about them is they had products that nobody really paid attention to before that now all of a sudden are huge success. So for instance, Tencent Meeting, it was something that nobody really used in China, but all of a sudden that's their top product right now. So, how they're able to kind of adapt to that and change with, working with other companies and giving things for free. Tencent Meeting is offered, right now they have everything free, and Zoom is doing this right now too. So I think these areas of bigger companies making some sacrifices and trying things will help them in the long run as well.
Well, it's funny you say that. I've had a lot of people reach out to me. They're like, wow, this like Microsoft Teams app is amazing, right? And so, a lot of things that a lot of us were already paying for, but didn't really know the full functionality. Yeah. And, it goes to the like other side of this, right? Which, I think we're already at least like in Hong Kong where, people are like back at work, stores are open. And actually we have like I don't know if we'll get it out today or tomorrow, but we've taken a ton of video there in terms of just, right, like things are kind of like popping again, which is great. And it's I find it very inspirational because as we're kind of, as some people refer to it, going into the tunnel, it's nice to see what it looks like on the other side. And, what are you seeing that's inspirational right now? And, any words of, kind of positivity or camaraderie that, that can come from you, Renee, because I always find that you're very solutions driven and, kind of really like to work with others in terms of collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I agree. It's great to kind of see China, and I think some of the, they've had a lot of kind of ceremonial. One of the things that's been really inspirational, I think, is they had all the medical staff in Wuhan who were, the ones that you saw kind of early on. They were really tough situation. A lot of people died who are the workers in Wuhan, the health workers. And now they kind of did a video of them all taking their masks off and they're all smiling. And so that type of stuff, I think, is just like very, emotionally uplifting to see people who are really, really struggling during this time and watch them come out of it. I think has been great because we were able to watch that whole process. So I think those are some of the uplifting, and honestly, sometimes just uplifting, like you said, like just seeing, videos of people walking around Sanlitun in the malls and just seeing people going back to the malls, like, oh, wow, that's happening again. So, the other thing I've seen come out of China is the pollution is, there's almost no pollution right now. So the environment's really nice. So I think those are some of the more inspirational things to come out of it. I think some of the things on the business side we saw, we've seen a huge impact. We just did a survey of consumer sentiment in China and how this has changed their outlook for life. And I think one of the things that we saw, a huge interest in self-care is going to be coming out of this. So it's been a really stressful time. And I think all of us are already realizing this now, but anything that's around self-care, I think, is something that's going to be a huge impact going forward. People are wanting to live more healthy lifestyles. We saw a huge increase in home fitness during the time. I mean, the Nintendo Ring is still sold out globally because of China. Everybody wanted it so badly. So home fitness is huge. But then we also saw, actually, even after it's over, an equal amount of people want to do outdoor fitness. So there's just this renewed interest in kind of healthy lifestyle. But then we still saw people who said, like, one of the most important things they want to do is they want to travel and they want to go out and explore. So I think what's been good to see too is it's not like things haven't totally changed. There are opportunities for, for growth. We have seen as people come out of it, yes, they're a little bit more cautious. They're going to spend a little bit less this year, but they're, where their behaviors have changed has been more refocused on kind of a healthy lifestyle, which is not necessarily a bad thing for anybody. And then they still have some optimism going forward and still wanting to explore and do new things. So I think that we'll see, we're hopeful that when this comes out, we will see kind of somewhat of a return back to normalcy. And I think seeing China do that has been helpful, just to kind of see, this gives you an example of what it can be like, on the other side of things.
You bring up something that I hadn't even thought about discussing here, but we've seen a big inbound interest in terms of how companies can utilize virtual reality to drive their business right now. And once again, in China, I think there's a bigger VR market and more content. And hey, I remember like 4 years ago, I was using my eye to like pay on something I was buying on a, kind of a Taobao. But it is, I think there's a renewed, right? Some of these technologies where they've been like, we have VR, we have AR, but there's a significant uptick in interest in terms of, right, what are some of these technologies that can, that we may have, like, a lot of these large organizations, right, had spent money investigating, and they kind of, I would say sunset it because they didn't feel that there was an immediate business impact. So the great news is they've done all the homework. They have kind of a plan. It's just a matter at this point of putting it in motion. So we're coming up on our 30 minutes, Renee, and I'd just love for you to kind of lead with some, final comments in terms of, how do you think we should all approach this? How should we work together? And, really kind of from the eyes and ears of you at CLA, how should we think about, kind of next steps for all of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think forums like this are really great, and it would be great to, I think, continue these. And I think looking at ways to kind of band together with other entrepreneurs has been really helpful for me personally, just to see what people are going through and just to talk to different people. And I think one of the other areas that's been helpful, honestly, sometimes is just talking to, I think yesterday I talked to someone in like Vancouver, Singapore, talking to people around the world and just kind of getting a sense of what it's like for them, I think has been interesting too. So I think it's a time to share insights and talk, and to be open with everybody else. So I think more forums for how we can all come together and to reach out to each other and kind of find out how we can all get through this together. It's a time that I think people are, kind of reminds me, it's not necessarily the best analogy, but it does remind me a little bit after 9/11 when people were kind of more open to, working together and trying new things. So I think this is a time when, all bets are off and it's kind of a new world. And so how do we work together to help each other? And I think the more we have forums like this is super helpful, and just to share ideas and even just to know that you're not alone going through it, I think is super helpful. So I think this has been great, and I look forward to more of these to be able to share ideas and bounce off different things we can help each other with.
Thanks, Renee. And I want to thank you for your support already in terms of some of the ideas you've had for Coresight. They've already made a difference. And everyone, we're going to continue to use this forum to figure out how to kind of all be stronger, on the other side, and how we can all work together. So thank you for joining for our inaugural Female Founders. Renee, thank you. And
thank you.
We'll see everyone next week, same time, 1 p.m. on Thursday. Thank you so much.
Thanks.